Still talking about the respiratory mechanism in lower animals, we'll now be considering toad. The toad respires by different methods and means depending on the stage of its development. The toad is in stages of development just like every other animal, but in respiration we'll be considering two stages, which is the tadpole stage, that's the young stage, and the adult stage. In the tadpole stage, it also comprises of two respiratory stages, that's the external gill stage and the internal gill stage. In the external gill stage, the tadpole absorbs oxygen dissolved in water which passes over them. The exchange of gases between the blood and surrounding water is by diffusion. So external gill stage involves diffusion. Then the internal gill stage, the respiratory system, the respiratory organ, consists of a few pairs of internal gills on either side of the head. The water from the surrounding enters through the mouth, then passes over the gills, and the oxygen in water is absorbed. The water then passes over the gill filament and leaves the body through a special opening called spiracle. You know, it's a bit advanced in the internal gill stage because it's no longer by diffusion but by the gills. And then the spiracle is involved. That's the opening through which the water leaves the body. Then in the adult stage, the adult toad respires by means of skin, that's the cutaneous respiration, through the mouth, buccal respiration, and then through the lung, that's the pulmonary respiration. In the cutaneous respiration, which involves the skin is well supplied with blood capillaries through which blood flows continually. The skin is kept moist with secretions from mucous gland so that cutaneous respiration takes place effectively, even when the toad is on ground. So the skin is not kept moist by water alone, it is kept moist by secretions from the mucous gland, so that whether in water or on land, the toad can undergo cutaneous respiration. As the toad comes in contact with the surrounding water, exchange of gases takes place between the water and the blood in the capillaries by diffusion, which is through the skin. Then in the buccal respiration, the buccal cavity of the toad is large and is lined by a thin mucous membrane, which is highly vascularized. Atmospheric air passes from the outside through the external, then the internal nares, that's the nostrils, into the buccal cavity. The buccal cavity, for the buccal cavity to open, the mouth is closed. The external nose are opened, then the floors of the buccal cavity is lowered. A low pressure is created in the buccal cavity, causing air from the outside to be drawn in through the nares. The external nares are then closed by the valves. Oxygen from the air enters the mouth while carbon dioxide from the blood is given off in return, and there is gaseous exchange. The floor of the mouth is then raised and the pressure of the air inside is increased. Air falls through the nasal passages and external ears, which are forced open. The hyoid muscles move the floor of the mouth up and down and causes air to flow in and out through the ears, which opens directly into the buccal cavity. This buccal respiration is a method of breathing that is used on the land, while the previous one that I mentioned, which is the cutaneous respiration, can both be used on land and in water. Then the third respiratory method in adult toad is the pulmonary respiration, which takes place by the means of the lungs. It takes place most frequently when the toad is excessively active and is used as an additional method of securing oxygen supplies. So it's an addendum. During pulmonary respiration, atmospheric air is drawn into the buccal cavity as the same method in the buccal respiration. The external nares are then closed and the floor of the mouth is raised. Air is forced into the lungs through the glottis, larynx, and the bronchi. The lung becomes inflated and the alveoli are filled with air. Oxygen from the enclosed air passes into the blood in the blood capillaries of the lungs, while carbon dioxide passes out of the capillaries into the lung and then is expelled. Now we're talking about exchange of gases in insects. How does insect exchange their gases? Gases are carried through the trachea, which leads from the surface to the interior of the insect. So the tubes are kept open by supporting rings called spiral. The trachea terminates in various tissues where gas exchange takes place. Oxygen dissolved in the body fluid diffuses into the spiracles, the external openings. The spiracles are the exchange organ or the respiratory organ in the insect. So they open to the external. Then internally, the trachea branches into many fine thin walls called tracheals. Just like you remember when we were talking about artery, arterioles, veins, venous. So the same thing here. We have trachea branching into tracheal, which penetrates into the tissue and are permeable to liquids and gases. The byproduct of respiration, which is carbon dioxide and water vapor, diffuse out from the tracheals through the spiracles. The tracheae are filled with liquid which flows up and down the tracheae, pumping air in and out as the body of the insect moves. Now we move to talk about cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the conversion of chemical energy of organic molecules to energy usable for all metabolic processes in living cells. Conversion of chemical energy of organic molecule to energy usable for all metabolic processes in living cells. Green plants that absorb energy from the sunlight also respire, and plants uses the energy of sunlight to build complex organic compounds. Building up process, that is anabolism, in the process of photosynthesis. The light energy being incorporated into the chemical bonds in the nutrient molecules. The chemical bonds must be broken down, and the breaking down process is the catabolism to release energy for the use by the cell. Then we have two basic types of respiration, of cellular respiration. We have the aerobic respiration and the anaerobic respiration. The aerobic respiration is the cellular respiration that requires consumption of free oxygen and production of carbon dioxide. Cellular respiration that involves consumption of free oxygen and production of carbon dioxide is known as the aerobic respiration. While anaerobic respiration is the reaction in which glucose is oxidized to carbon dioxide and water with liberation of energy. Energy is also liberated by the metabolic breakdown of substances without free oxygen being involved in the reaction. So in anaerobic respiration, oxygen is not involved, but in aerobic respiration, you have oxygen involved. For instance, glycogen is broken down to lactic acid in vertebrate muscle, or glucose to ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide by yeast with the aid of enzymes. Anaerobic respiration does not liberate as much energy as aerobic respiration. Aerobic organisms respire anaerobically sometimes, even though they are aerobic organisms, that is, they use up oxygen in their respiratory process, but sometimes they respire without oxygen. That is, maybe when oxygen is not available, they have to respire without oxygen. Aerobic organisms, like I said earlier, also respire anaerobically due to shortage of oxygen. Maybe sometimes the oxygen they have is not sufficient for the that time, for the process they want to undergo. So it results in what we call oxygen debt. That is, they lack oxygen and they want to undergo metabolic activity, or they want to undergo respiration. And this may occur in vertebrate muscles, especially during prolonged exercise or vigorous activity. The muscle cells respire anaerobically with the accumulation of lactic acid, which prevents the muscle from contracting, which eventually leads to muscle pull. And this is the equation that represents that. In the aerobic respiration, we still see that equation again. We have glucose, but in this case, you see lactic acid, that's C3H6O3 plus oxygen, 3 molecules of oxygen will give 3 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 3 molecules of water plus energy. So that's a representation of anaerobic respiration. Then the mechanism of cellular respiration. The breakdown of glucose in the cells of living organisms to produce energy involves 2 major pathways: the glycolytic pathway, or what is called the Embden-Meyerhof pathway, then the Krebs cycle, which is also known as the citric acid cycle or the tricarboxylic acid cycle. In the glycolytic pathway, it involves what we call glycolysis, that is sugar splitting. This occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. Glucose is broken down through a series of reactions to pyruvyl